Welcome to FS-ISAC's podcast, FinCyber Today. I'm Elizabeth Heathfield, Chief Corporate Affairs Officer at FS-ISAC. Nobody really knows when quantum computing will become a reality, and many financial firms take the view that it's a problem for tomorrow. But Debbie Janeczek, Global CISO at ING, makes a very strong business case for why we need to start preparing for the quantum revolution today.
Thank you so much for being here. So I'm excited for this conversation because we have had a couple of conversations on the more technology side about post-quantum cryptography and quantum computing with all the things that CISOs need to be thinking about right now. Why should they dedicate, time, resources, consideration to PQC and quantum computing?
Because it's going to be a long journey to get to the cryptography secure algorithms to get those rolled out into your system. So you have to start from scratch. You have to start from first awareness. So what is it? How is it going to impact us? Getting your leadership on board with why they need to think about it. Mm-hmm. And it shouldn't be a security-led function. It should be led from the top because it impacts the whole company. Mm-hmm. So first, getting awareness across the company. And then once you get that awareness, you have to know where your cryptography is. So you have to have an inventory of your cryptography throughout the company. And how do you do that? There's going to be a lot of manual. There's going to be automation that you can use to find your cryptography. And how do you assess what you need to secure first? You're going to have use a risk framework. What is the crown jewels? What would be the biggest impact if that cryptography failed? Would it be finance? Would it be reputation? Would it be customer data? Mm-hmm. So all of those things have to be taken into consideration when you're doing your inventory across the organization. But you also have to think of you can't do one and done. As new systems come in, applications, processes, you have to update that inventory annually at least, because there's going to be new algorithms that come out, new cryptography safe algorithms that come out. So you're going to have to know where that is. So you're going to have a risk framework. You're going to have to put it into your governance to keep that inventory updated. So for the future.
Would you say that this whole sort of preparation for post-quantum age is like a parallel effort to everything else that you're doing? Or do you embed it in your, for example, third-party risk management and other kinds of, risk management frameworks that you already have?
It can be both. It depends. Some companies have a dedicated team, so they are dedicated to driving it. Other companies, between how many headcount you have, if you can do it a separate team, you might have to do parallel efforts. I think it should be, like I said, it needs to be company-wide. So once you get the buy-in, there should be terms of reference developed. There should be a working group that includes architecture, production, especially production, because they've got a lot of the crypto. So it needs to be, once you get it into the company, it needs to be company-wide so that every piece of the company has to do a parallel effort or have a separate team dedicated to it.
You mentioned once you get the buy-in, how would you suggest that CISOs and others who are kind of at the forefront of this go about securing buy-in from the very top when there's so many other competing, priorities for resources?
You have to lay out the argument very carefully. What I've seen some companies do, what I've done in the past, is bring in experts, tech talks. You do articles with some of the research institutes have really good articles of how companies need to be prepared and why it's important. So you have to have the conversation. CISOs have the floor with their executive committee, with the board. It needs to be integrated into those conversations so that you get that awareness.
Yeah, I was going to say, because it is, when you think about qubits and physics and, all of this kind of thing, probably your average C-level executive is not something they're spending a lot of time on. So what balance do you strike between, giving them a bit of an understanding of the technology and the technical challenge there and the business impact that technical challenge is going to have?
Yeah, I think it's just a story of here's our PKI, here's what would be impacted, and here is what the result would be if we weren't quantum ready. So I think it's a very easy story without even going into qubits, because myself and qubits are friends. So I think it's an easy story to tell. I think when you have the inventory with the crown jewels, and you can use that as a story of the impact. Yeah.
You mentioned a little bit third party, but I think it'd be interesting to think about, right? One of the biggest challenges facing the sector, obviously, is managing third party and supply chain risk writ large. How are you, or are you yet, or how are you thinking about your conversations with your suppliers and making sure that they are also thinking about moving towards a post-quantum future?
I actually think this is one of the easier parts, because as a CISO organization and companies writ large are dealing with third-party risk management. So we're already looking at how do we manage third parties, who are our most strategic third parties, our most critical third parties.
Right.
How are we making sure that they have their security in place? And there's regulatory questions coming from our regulators on how are we securing our third parties. So we're looking at, can we pen test? We're looking at what is your security plan, putting information in their contracts to make sure they have a security program. So this is just another step in that process. So it doesn't have to be a whole separate process. It can be implemented into your already established governance process for your third-party risk on what are you doing for post-quantum cryptography. And I think it's our responsibility to work with our closest vendors, our most critical vendors, and have that conversation, asking what is their roadmap, what is their timeline, what are they planning, are they looking at it yet, and also partnering with them. We have old systems, new systems. How are those going to be impacted when you're rolling out these new algorithms? And you can use your third-party partners to help test those before you roll them out. So I think it's a partnership, but also a contractual obligation that they need to also be prepared for post-quantum cryptography.
So you said that was easy, and I see why, because you're already having to do a lot of this anyway. So it's
the conversation might not be easy. But the governance is kind of already there.
Yeah. Okay, so what's the hardest part? Like, what are you finding, not necessarily specifically in your organization, but sector-wide, what are you finding is actually the hardest part about getting this ball rolling?
I think the hardest part is, I've heard many different things, like, we gotta move, to, I've heard some CISOs say, it's not coming. We don't need to. Coming up with arguments why it's probably never going to come to fruition. But you don't know. And are you preparing too early, or are you going to be preparing too late? So it's getting that sweet spot, and we don't know what that sweet spot is because we don't know when it's going to be here. So I think the hardest part is we're going to have some organizations preparing, and we're going to have some that are not. And as a financial sector, we're kind of in a team game here. Yeah. So I think getting that balance across the sector and getting the awareness across the sector is what the biggest challenge is.
Yeah, and FS-ISAC, we have a post-quantum cryptography working group, very active, very prolific, putting out papers left and right, because we realize, right, that this is, it's more than even a sector level challenge, but it's certainly a sector level challenge. I guess my question is, what is the balance between what an individual firm needs to do and the education that they need to have, and this sort of sector level effort? How do you think firms should best utilize what is happening on the sector level to kind of get things going within their individual firm?
Yeah, I think we have to. It's a new skill set. And a lot of people don't have the skill set. The vendors don't have the skill set. So we're kind of learning and preparing to get there together. So we have to use the research institutes that are already doing heavy research, getting involved in those, doing our own research, pulling from different research bodies, universities, working with them. A lot of them have test labs where they're running their own tests on quantum and then post-quantum cryptography, actively testing the new algorithms that came out from NIST. So getting involved in that, if your company can, getting involved with the vendors to do testing, I think that is probably the best area to start pulling in that skill set. It's going to be hard to hire for it. How do you find the skill set?
Yeah.
So you're going to have to make sure that you have some dedicated folks that are researching and getting spun up on that to get that skill set where we need it to be, because that also has to go over to the developers who's going to be implementing the new algorithms. So they're going to have to learn and get spun up. So we have to make sure they're prepared on the knowledge they're going to need to roll out new post-quantum cryptography.
What are the consequences of not getting this right?
Yeah, I think those could be significantly very, very large. So if you think of PII, if there is a breach and your PII is impacted, you have customer trust. If you're not ready and you're not protecting your core systems, if you think of where your crown jewels are in your protected production area, if that is not protected and you're in the news and you're behind the power curve on having the new algorithms rolled out, how do you then catch up after you've been impacted? And if it's a small company, is that recoverable?
Yeah. What else do you think that your fellow CISOs and security teams need to understand about this now to try to get, make it happen and get people on board?
I think one of the things is it's not a Y2K. It's not a one and done.
Yeah.
It is going to be continuous. And I think that we need to collaborate as an industry to tell the same story across companies. So when senior leadership talk, and they do, they're all getting the same information, so they all know how critical and important it is. I think that's the best thing we can do as partner, and we're doing that with FS-ISAC and the working groups. I know there's several different financial institutions that are involved in that and using their expertise to be able to do that, and help share that information out to the sector. So I think we continue that, and the CISOs need to be aware and support their teams in doing that as they're driving this knowledge within the company.